Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're going to listen to the People magazine investigates Green family massacre. It's a true crime.
The single most disturbing thing I've ever seen. They were bound and then bludgeoned. Why exact that sort of understand why someone could do that? There is no understanding. Some people are just evil. In the weeks and months following, we saw our community never give up hope. I believe that there could be other victims. Our blood ran cold. We now have a serial killer. In northwest Idaho, nestled in the foothills of the Canfield Mountains, is the small city of Coeur d'Alene. The town of Coeur d'Alene had a population of about 35,000. This is just such a beautiful place. It just seems like it's just a hidden gem, and it was for many years. We're known for our beautiful lake, the resorts, boating, summer and winter activities. It's also raised her daughter Brenda in Coeur d'Alene. I am Darlene Torres. Brenda was the oldest of four girls. All my children were born and raised in Coeur d'Alene.
I'm Brandy Hoagland, and Brenda Groene was my sister. I always looked up to her. She was the one that always came to save me when I was upset, to calm me down. And I always thought that she was just so beautiful. In my eyes, she was a model. She always just a very flighty attitude, always was the person that could walk into a room and brighten it up.
She was a great person with her sisters and a great person to raise. Stubborn, but great.
In 2005, Brenda's a 40-year-old divorced mom. She's raising the three youngest of her five children on a little property previously owned by her grandparents. It's 9 miles outside of Coeur d'Alene. They call it Wolf Lodge.
That was the house where Brenda's numerous amounts of children there.
So many of my memories out at the Wolf Lodge house are about family gatherings. A lot of family just knew that it was an open door kind of policy. There was a lot of people that would tend to gather out there.
It was old-fashioned place. She didn't have a dishwasher. She didn't have a washer and dryer. She cooked on a propane stove, but she loved it out there because she liked the outdoors.
I'm Robert Lutner, and I was friends with Brenda.
After the divorce, the two oldest children moved in with their father. Brenda's three youngest, Slade, Dylan, and Shasta, stayed at Wolf Lodge with their mother.
Slade was a fine young man. He just getting at that age where, girls and all that.
He didn't want to be a part of all of the family stuff. He wanted to go and be the teenager. And he just seemed really happy and go lucky. 13 years old, and he was going to get into music just like his older brothers. He was perfect.
He was
Very bashful, very shy.
Brenda called Dylan her little teddy bear because that's the way he was. Once he got close to you, he was just like a little cuddly teddy bear. Very sweet kid. And Shasta Ray. To Brenda, Shasta Ray was her little Ray Ray.
It was definitely a pleasure when Shasta came along. We could finally start buying bows and dresses. At the same time, she was quite a tomboy, but she did enjoy kind of
Shasta could light up a room with her smile. Just the cutest little thing you ever seen. But she was tough, though, man. She had all brothers, and she had a whip, though.
Life at Wolf Lodge is peaceful, and a few months after her divorce, Brenda Groene sparks up a new relationship with an old friend, Mark Mackenzie.
Brenda had always known Mark. Mark grew up around Wolf Lodge himself. I don't think they ever thought that they were going to be together or nothing. I think it just kind of happened. He was a good guy, a really good guy.
Just a hell of a man. And we just became real good friends because we hunted and fished. Mark treated the kids like they were his. I didn't know the difference. You couldn't tell the difference.
After dating for 4 years, Brenda asked Mark to live with her and her kids. From the outside looking in, Brenda and Mark and the kids appear to have a promising future together as a family. In May 2005, all of that changes.
My name is Detective Sergeant Brad Maskell. I joined the Cooney County Sheriff's Office bedroom for the Sheriff's Office. On May the 16th of 2005, the dispatch center, they received a call from Bob Hollingsworth.
Bob was a really close friend of Brenda's and Mark's.
He'd always be joking around with the kids, and they really enjoyed him being around.
They were all in that little house, the whole family. We were good neighbors. Slade called me and wanted to know if I had a little money. And I said, well, you can mow that grass down the driveway. And he said, I will.
Pay the teenage boy Slade for doing some yard work for him.
I went to the back door, and that's when I realized the door was open, and I hollered and nobody came. Then I saw all the blood on the floor. I called the sheriff, and he said he'd send a deputy out, and I said, you better send more than one.
Situated just off the interstate, deputies arrive at Wolf Lodge within barking. The Groene house is silent.
They got to the back entrance of the house and they found that back entrance door was slightly ajar. They were able to make their way inside the house in an effort to ascertain what was going on in there. Immediately noticed that there was blood on the walls and on the floor. Moving into the house, they discovered 3 deceased individuals. At that point, they secured that residence and called for a detective assistance. May the 16th of 2000, when I received a call asking that I come into service pertaining to a murder in the Wolf Lodge district. At first, I thought he was joking with me. However, I immediately became aware that he was not. When I arrived there, the deputies were standing there, and I could see on their faces that they were disturbed, that they had just seen something that was pretty graphic.
I'm Mike Ginecco. I'm the retired FBI agent who was assigned to the murder investigation at Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I don't think anything prepared me for the experience.
Shocking scene to see. There was a lot of blood throughout the home. Blood on the walls, blood smears, blood stains. The victims clearly were victims of an extremely violent attack. There was the body of a teenage boy, the body of an adult woman, and the body of an adult man. The teenage boy His
Okay,
arms
he won't
taped
quit.
behind his
Wait,
back,
just lay down.
that tape around his
Stop.
face and mouth. His head was lying right at the feet of the
No,
female
you're not going
adult,
to train me.
bound
I'm
and tied
sorry.
behind her back with
You don't
duct tape
train
and
me.
zip
Stop.
ties. And then going into the living room was the adult male, and his feet were right at the head of the adult female. Again, with his hands bound with zip ties, also duct tape. Each of the victims had multiple bludgeoning injuries to their heads.
The deputy who was the first to respond to the scene knows the Groones, and he instantly recognizes Brenda, Mark, and 13-year-old Slade as the victims.
His 9-year-old Dylan and 8-year-old Shasta.
Investigators searched the rest of the house looking for Dylan and Shasta. There was blood everywhere, but there are no signs of the two children.
But the Kootenai County Sheriff's deputies are surprised by what they find. It's nothing short of a small arsenal.
There was a lot of firearms in the house. In fact, in the upstairs, there was quite a number of firearms up there. And most of the time when you would have a home robbery, one of the things that people would take is guns. But the guns weren't.
Into as investigators trying to piece together what could have happened.
With a triple homicide and 2 missing children, Kootenai County calls for support from Idaho State Police and the FBI. They cordon off the property as local news trucks begin broadcasting from the scene.
I turned on the news and they were talking about 3 people that had been killed at Wolf Lodge. I was in denial. I couldn't believe it.
We have a homicide scene with one adult male, one adult female, and one juvenile male.
I'm like, Mom, we don't know who it is. But then we got a hold of the police, and that's when we were told that they had identified Brenda and Mark, and then Slade. Oh, that was. I just fell apart.
The major concern right now are the 2 children we cannot find.
And then, of course, the police officer said that the 2 younger children were missing. We couldn't believe it. And we couldn't figure it out. We couldn't understand it.
My name is Don Robinson. I am a retired FBI supervisory special agent. Our role in this early stage of the case of the FBI was to find the children. We asked that Brenda's family, were they staying with their father? Shasta and Dylan's parents were divorced, so could they have been in the other household? They said the kids had not gone to stay with their dad. They weren't out visiting or staying with friends or other family members.
The realization that the thing was just horrible. It was horrible.
Even though we just lost these 3 family members and we're not even getting a moment to be able to grieve for them, we have to immediately start thinking about where are these 2 kids?
Hoping 8-year-old Shasta and 9-year-old Dylan Groene escape the violence at the house, investigators immediately start searching the area.
And got away.
We had search teams out there on horseback with search dogs pounding the hillsides looking for the kids.
We immediately start gathering together. We're looking for those little ones, and it just started to feel like you're looking for a needle in a haystack because there's so much mountainous area here, and we have no idea, are they even still in the area?
While the search is on for Shasta and Dylan, back at the house, Kootenai County crime scene techs and investigators start collecting evidence and analyzing the scene.
Well, we did look at the method that the victims had been murdered, the fact that they were bound and then obviously bludgeoned after that. It seemed somewhat unique. It seemed almost like a signature sort of thing that someone would do. The fact that heavy-duty zip ties and duct tape were used, those were all things that were very specific.
Idaho State Police came in and they were processing the crime scene. One fingerprint was found on the front door, adjacent to some of the bloodstains that were there.
But it doesn't appear the front door was forced open.
So now we need to start thinking that were the kids abducted? Certainly that was a possibility.
The Idaho State Police at that particular time made the call that we're going to put an Amber Alert out. The Groene house was right next to the interstate, and so very visible. Anyone committing a crime there would have had easy access to the interstate, an easy escape route. If someone wanted to create as much distance as possible between themselves and the crime before the crime was discovered, there was plenty of opportunity to get the heck out of there fairly easily.
Road, everybody in town looking for these kids.
We have 2 young children that are unaccounted for. We're hoping that somewhere somebody will see these children, maybe at a truck stop, a rest area, something like that, and call the police. Maybe get them back home to the folks.
It was terrible. I mean, just horrible. Here we were driving around trying to find these children or catch glimpses of them. We'd drive for miles. And then, of course, up on these signs all over the freeways and highways and stuff, we were seeing Amber Alerts. And it was my grandkids saying, this just cannot be happening.
On the second day of the search, investigators tried to reconstruct a timeline to the victims, and they learned about a party that took place the night the family was murdered. A party that might help ID their killer.
People just knew that Mark and Brenda had an open door. And so on May 15th, I think people just ended up gathering out there that evening and a barbecue ended up forming. I do know there was quite a presence out there that night though.
Police talked to friends and family to find out who was
there. The kids were there. We learned of one of the participants of the barbecue, a fellow by the name of Bob Butner. He was there. We heard there was some kind of minor verbal altercation between him and Mark over money, which at the time takes on a lot of significance.
They asked me about Bob, the law enforcement people did, and I told them I didn't know him personally and I hadn't really been around him all that much, but Mark and Brenda seemed to put him as a very good friend.
Before day 2 of the a promising lead.
Jesse told the investigators that Bob Lutner owed his mother Brenda money. And is there a possibility that money owed would be behind this? Maybe there's more to the story, so to speak. When we looked into Bob Lutner, we discovered that he did have a criminal history involving drugs and some other offenses.
Because Bob has a record, his fingerprints are on file. Detective Maskell's team compares Bob's fingerprints to those found at the crime scene, and it's a match.
That, you can see how this starts compounding, where now all of a sudden, Bob's our priority, we gotta find Bob.
But when the FBI tries to speak with Bob, they learn he seemingly skipped town.
We learned from his probation officer that the day after the killings in the Wolf Lodge, Mr. Lutner basically told his probation officer he was going to go visit family and leave the area.
It appeared as though he was trying to avoid being contacted by the FBI.
If he had taken the kids, he's going to jump to number one on the list, and we're going to try to find him.
2 days after the gruesome Wolf Lodge murders, investigators inform the public that they have a lead, but they need help tracking him down.
We put out in the media that Mr. Lutner was a person of interest in the case.
We've got a lot of questions we want to ask Mr. Lutner. He seems to have just disappeared.
I was blasted all over CNN and all that as a person of interest. They were looking for answers. So when I got they're after me, I go and turn myself right into my PO's office.
Somebody's going to turn themselves in that quickly. It's either going to be somebody who's feeling so innocent and wants to get it off their back. We sat down and interviewed him extensively.
I didn't really care. I mean, my friends were murdered. I don't give what you ask me. If I know the answer, I'll tell you. And I agreed to answer anything they wanted.
We asked him, was there some kind of verbal altercation between him and Mark?
I told him there was no altercation ever over money. I was trying to stop the foreclosure on my home, and Mark and Brenda, they had loaned me $1,000, and that's what that payment was for.
Robert explains he wasn't intentionally trying to evade investigators. His aunt had died, and he was headed to...
I'm thinking I was fleeing. That's where a person of interest came in.
But after learning his friends were murdered, Robert explains he was reeling from the news.
I just recognized the house, and it shocked me. As soon as I seen that, I was beside myself. I was right there in Coeur d'Alene. I was just in a bottle, and I didn't answer the phone. That's probably would have helped if I would have just went in and seen him. I mean, no matter how messed up I would have been, but I was hurting, so.
We were able to ultimately...
There was no leads. There was absolutely no leads at all. There was nothing to go off, and everybody was stumped. They were grasping at straws.
With Bob Lutner out of the picture, investigators take a second look at the crime scene for any clues about who could have committed this heinous act.
The fact that the bodies were so beaten up so badly, it made the crime appear to be a crime of passion.
You begin to think about who could have been so angry at this family.
Two we were looking at were maybe a family member was responsible for the murders and they had taken the children.
By speaking with family, investigators learn more about Brenda's 15-year marriage to Stephen Groene and their subsequent divorce.
I think Brenda got a little tired of the wildlife. Steve was like a motorcycle guy. He was into playing music in the bars and stuff.
He had some connections to motorcycle gangs.
Brenda just got where she just wanted other things.
But it turns out the direction of their marriage was only one of their gripes. The kids were also a frequent subject of their arguments.
Steve and Brenda, they were having some tension for sure as it related to the custody of the kids and what one person wanted and what the other one wanted as it related to the house.
With the type of crime that we had there initially, suggestive of rage, certainly we would wonder, could he possibly have been so angry as to do something like that?
3 days after
He was very insistent, find my children, you're not doing enough, find my children, and as you would expect a parent to be. We told him, listen, Steve, you need to understand, this is going to be painful. And in order to clear you, we need to investigate.
Steve tells them he's been living with Brenda's mom, Darlene, and that during the time of murders, he was hiding on his computer all night.
Steve had suggested he needed a place to stay for a while, so they were kind of staying with me at the time,
Steve Groene failed the polygraph.
Unable to hold Steve on a polygraph, investigators let him go. But as of right now, Steve Groene is their number one suspect.
Later that same day, the medical examiner's office issues results from Brendan, Mark, and Slade's autopsies.
The official cause of death from the enemy was blunt impact injuries to the head and major bleeding. The medical examiner was able to tell us. So this kind of narrowed some of our focus. Now we at least knew a probable murder weapon. The blood analysis that was done on all of the blood inside the house, it all belonged to Slade Groene.
We found that none of the blood in the house belonged to the two small children. It actually was a motivating factor for the investigators because there was a glimmer of hope that the children were still alive.
That went through the investigation like a bolt of lightning.
Shasta and Dylan is still going strong, and the media's interest in this case continues to grow.
The day after Steve Groene fails his polygraph, he decides to hold a press conference and makes an emotional plea on national television.
I'd like to address my children's abductors or abductor. Please release my children safely. They had nothing to do with any of this.
Steve's comment has everyone asking, any of what?
On May the 19th, during that press briefing, was talking about.
They had nothing to do with any of this.
It almost to many people sounded like a message to the abductor. And that leads the thought, has he been contacted? And, is this a kidnapping for ransom? Or is this a kidnapping for something else?
Of some motorcycle gang activity. One theory was that Steve had somehow pissed off a member of another motorcycle gang, and for them to send a message to Steve, they went after the family. We knew that some motorcycle gangs use hammer killings as a way of exacting retribution or sending threatening messages. But the disappearance of the children was such an anomaly. I mean, what would be the plan? Are they going to hold the kids for ransom? The alibi. We interviewed the family he was living with at the time.
I knew he was there at the house. Steve and Brenda, they were having some tension for sure, but then you start to circle back around and you're thinking, I don't think he could have ever done anything like that to his own kids. It takes a real monster to be able to do that.
Even though family members don't believe Steve committed these horrific murders or abducted his own kids, investigators search his room and seize his computer.
Through computer forensic analysis, the fact that we consider that to be strong evidence of an alibi, chances are he was the one using it. Steve also took a number of polygraph exams. And ultimately, at the end, we were convinced that Steve was not the person that we were looking for.
In the meantime, thousands of tips are pouring into the investigation hotline from people claiming to have spotted Shasta and Dylan.
We would get into our cars and we would drive around looking for those little ones. We come up empty-handed and we're just so puzzled. Who could have possibly done this? And we're so trapped in reality starting to set in that we've got to start gathering photos and memories to be able to have a service for Brenda and Slade, and all while the children are still missing. We have no idea where they're at.
We're just asking you and praying that you will bring those kiddos safe. As Jesus
As the first week of the investigation comes to a close, over 400 acres of land and water site, but there are no signs of them dead either. The community isn't giving up hope.
We had volunteers knocking the doors down to get in and help us answer phones, posting flyers on business windows, going door to door.
Every tip right now is valuable to us. We will look everywhere they tell us to look, but we will not stop looking. We hope that you will look with us.
One of the things that I really tried to promote was to keep the faces of the missing children in the media as much as I possibly could. I hoped that on the highway would help us to find these kids as quickly as we could.
The community felt as though this family, these kids were their own, that these were their kids that were taken from them.
For 40 days, investigators searched for any shred of evidence that will lead them to their perpetrator.
That time was very grueling on the investigators because there were a number of dead ends.
We worked 7 days a week, probably 16, 17 hours a day. Oh, there's that. You have 2 children that have been abducted, and you got to make darn sure that those kids are recovered.
Every day. And we were up again that next day thinking, this could be the day. This could be the day that we break this case.
And on July 2nd, Coeur d'Alene police receive a 911 call that changes everything.
Yeah, hi, this is the manager getting. Yeah, I've got a little girl here with a small German, and she looks so much like her chef does.
The restaurant sits really, really uniquely, strategically right off the highway. I went in for a regular shift, and I had been at work for probably about 4 hours. Coming back from break, I see a man and what looks to be a child in my section. I was about 1:30, 1:45-ish in the morning, so it was a little strange. But I walked over to say hello to my customers. When I got to the table, everything felt off. The hair on the back of my little girl, she was filthy. You could tell her hair wasn't very clean. She was in clothes that absolutely looked filthy. I asked, can I get you something to drink? She would not respond at all. And he wouldn't take his eyes off of her, which is just odd.
At that moment, Amber finally recognizes the little girl from the news and flyers posted around town. It's 8-year-old Shasta Groene.
I knew it was her. It was a child in need. I'm a mother. To do nothing, that's not something I can live with.
Amber knows that this is a delicate situation, so she plays it cool.
I said, honey, did you decide on something to drink? I saw him give a nod, and she asked for a shake. I said, okay, I'll go get that for you.
Amber immediately reports to her manager that she's pretty sure the missing girl that's been all over the news is now sitting in their restaurant. The manager calls 911 and the local police are dispatched.
Can you pass a meal, please? 65663. Okay, all right, we'll have someone go that way.
I knew that it would take at least 6 to 8 minutes for anybody down at the lake to get up 4th Street to Denny's. immediately out in an effort to buy time. I was walking towards his table when the two of them stood up. I stepped in front of them and said, "Oh, is there anything else I can get you? Her shake's almost done." He does not take his eyes off the top of her head and just says, "The check." And I said, I'll do what I can. But
May never be seen again.
I'm praying that I can make this work. I pretend that I'm having a problem getting his ticket to print. He goes, "Okay, just hurry. You got it." He was trying to leave. And at the time, it seemed like 30 officers entered that tiny Denny's. They seemed to take up the whole space.
As soon as law enforcement arrived, they immediately recognized Shasta.
I'm Shasta Groene, and I remember seeing in our table an officer who walked up, tapped him on the shoulder, and arrested him. And then I remember them taking me to the hospital.
2 o'clock in the morning. Miss Lee, the phone rings. It's Brad. We've got Shasta. And I'm like, what? You've got to be kidding me. And we've got a guy here too with her, and we're going to try to interview him. And I got out of bed so fast. And so many.
Police identify the man as Joseph Duncan.
He was recovered in a Jeep Cherokee that was a rental vehicle. It was reported stolen. I didn't know who this guy was or what in the world I was walking into, but I knew I was going to try to get to the bottom of it.
And I looked at the driver's license. He has a Fargo, North Dakota address. And we started making the number of inquiries as soon as he was detained.
When they run his name through the database, it reveals that Duncan is currently a fugitive on a molestation charge out of Minnesota.
It didn't take long.
A level 3 sex offender is someone who's committed the most serious of sex offenses and considered to be at high risk of reoffending.
I was an assistant United States attorney and one of 3 trial counsel for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Idaho.
When investigators dig deeper into Duncan's background, they uncover a shocking criminal past dating back to his youth in the early 1980s.
Joseph Duncan spent most of his growing up years in the Seattle, Washington, Tacoma, Washington area. Joseph Duncan was raised in a family with a very strict mother. It was handed down in the Duncan family that he began committing offenses and sex offenses at a pretty young age. He was prosecuted when he was 17 years old for sexually assaulting a 14-year-old boy and sentenced to 20 years in the Washington state system. He got put through an early on sex offender program within the prison system.
Duncan spent, a year and a half at Western State Hospital in the Seattle area.
He has been examined by a lot of mental health professionals.
They ultimately said, and so he went into the general population.
He was in the Washington Department of Correction until 1996 when he was paroled.
Duncan moved to Kansas City, Missouri, but he failed to register as a sex offender, which was a violation of his parole, and this landed him behind bars again.
He then was paroled again in 1997, violated again because he had left the state and wasn't in contact with his parole officer. Joseph Duncan, during the time he was with the Washington correction system, just demonstrated again and again that he couldn't follow the rules.
He was released in 2000 and moved to Fargo, North Dakota, to study computer science at a local university. He appeared to be the poster boy for an ex-convict on the mend. It was all bizarre.
After Duncan was in Fargo for a couple of years, anytime that there missing person or a sex crime of any type, Duncan would receive a visit from the police department doing their job, checking out all the various sex offenders and make sure that they weren't involved in this crime. And it was starting to piss Duncan off. Going to continue to treat me like this, then fine. I'm going to go out and do something about it.
In the summer of 2004, Joseph Duncan traveled across state lines to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota.
Then he went out, stalked a couple of young boys at a park.
He approached them and fondled one of them. The boys described that there was sort of a little cut or a cleft in his lip, which Joseph Duncan had.
Duncan was identified as the predator and found himself again in a courtroom on his behalf. As soon as he was released, Duncan made a decision that would change the course of fate for so many.
With that bond, he was free pending the resolution of those charges. Less than 4 months later, Idaho police arrest Duncan for kidnapping Shasta Groene. While detectives continue assessing the man they've apprehended, at the Kootenai Medical Center Hospital, Shasta is rushed into surgery.
He damaged my body, and they had to put me under anesthesia to give me as many stitches as I needed.
Like relieved, like she was so happy to see familiar faces.
I remember waking up when my dad was just standing above me, and I just remember, saying "Daddy" and putting my arms around him, and like he was crying, and I cried.
Shasta's doing well, which, it's certainly more than we could have hoped for.
First and foremost in my mind was, we have to find Dylan. We've got her. Where's her brother? Brad and I tried to go in very run down, very exhausted. And so Brad read him his rights, and he invoked his rights. He said, I'm not going to talk.
Investigators have no choice but to turn to Shasta for answers. Nothing prepares them for the amount of trauma and horror she endured.
For a 8-year-old girl, she remembered a lot of detail. She told us the story that started with the events that happened at Wolf Lodge. She talked about being asleep in the room.
She was crying. I was like, is it time to go to school? And she was like, no, someone's in the house and they don't want us to be here. So I just got up and followed my mom out into the living room. My brother Slade and my stepdad Mark, they were on the floor and they were bound by their hands and their feet. And I saw this guy. He was dressed in all black and had a shotgun, and he had a mask on. He instructed us to get on the ground. When I laid down and he started to tie my wrists together, right then and there, I was something to. At that point, he instructed everybody to keep their head on the ground and to not look up. And I heard some scuffling, and then a couple of minutes passed by where it was quiet, and I could just hear footsteps. And then I felt a tap on my shoulder. And then I looked up, and he put his hand to his mouth, telling me to, be quiet. And so he picked me up and took me outside and laid me next to my brother on the ground where the apple tree was in the backyard. Me and Dylan were just saying that we were. I heard thumping. I heard thumping, and then I heard Mark like grunting in pain. When I looked over, my brother Slade came running out
of the side of the house, and he was just covered in blood. His wrists were still bound behind his back, but he got his feet loose somehow, and you could tell that he was confused, like he didn't really know where to go, and just kept repeatedly hitting my brother with a hammer. He cut off the zip ties and had us walking. I saw my brother slain again, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and then he just slumped over, and basically just kept staring at me. I felt like in that moment, that he had died looking at me.
After sustaining the injuries that he had, and that's why there was blood on the door, blood on the steps, and blood in front of the kid's bedroom in the grass. He moved into the house, and ultimately he must have got up, walked out to where his mother was, laid down next to her, and that's where he died.
He put us in a Jeep, and he took off. I didn't know where we were going or what his plans were, but I just knew that what had just happened probably wasn't over yet. I just remember falling asleep, and the next time we woke up, we were at this campsite in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere. So I asked him where we were, and he said that we were in the Lolo Forest in Montana.
Please look up the Lolo National Forest and learn it's about 150 miles from the Groene home and extremely desolate.
There was a spot that he took us to where basically from where we were, nobody could see us. The chances of somebody hearing us probably was slim to none. He had gotten to the camp, he told us his name was Joe, but then he told us that we weren't allowed to call him Joe, that we had to call him Dad or Daddy or Jet. He told us that Jet was the name that his husband in prison gave him, Jazzy Jet. He took his shotgun out and he shot this big tree, and he was just like, "You guys don't do what I say, or if you guys try to run or anything like that, this is what's going to happen to you." And I just remember looking at the tree, and there was a huge hole in the tree, and it scared me. And that Slade was fine, and that we were going to go home to them if we complied and did what we were supposed to.
And Shasta tells the detectives about the abuse she and her brother endured, and it's just unspeakable.
The first hour that he had us at the campsite, he started saying the Lord's Prayer, and then he would have us recite it. While we were reciting the Lord's Prayer is when he started sexually assaulting us. One second he would be saying that he was there because God told him to, and then one second he was in. I remember falling asleep, holding my brother's hand, and when I woke up, it was the next day. It was light outside, but he was sleeping, and so I took that opportunity to talk to my brother, and my brother had said, "I'm scared." I was like, "Me too," and but I'm not gonna let anything happen to you. I was like, I'm gonna make sure that we get out alive.
As days turn into weeks, the horror continues.
There was a couple times where he said he had to go to town to get more food or something, but me and Dylan would be chained. I would be chained to a tree, and Dylan would be chained to the tent that had the stakes in the ground and stuff. He would make sure that we weren't close enough to be able to help each other, but we would be close enough to conversate, which is kind of hopeless.
we knew that if we tried to get away, we would probably starve to death. We didn't even know where we were. Then Joseph Duncan had us play this game where if we caught this squirrel that kept coming to the campsite, that we could go home. And Dylan caught the squirrel. And Joseph Duncan had us thinking that we were packing up and that he was going to let us go home. I was standing there with my brother. I had just given him a hug, and so I was holding his hand, and I heard a loud bang and a crashing sound, and then I felt my brother's hand slip from mine. He was basically like holding his insides, trying to keep them from falling. And he was on the ground. I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything. I just stared at him. I was in disbelief. Joseph Duncan walked up to him and he shot my brother in the head. And after Joseph Duncan shot Dylan, he made me help him put his body onto a tarp and collect all of his belongings and put it around Dylan. And he poured gasoline over his body and then lit him on fire. And sat there and watched. And I just remember in my head, I thought I could still hear my brother screaming. You know, I thought that he was still alive. I feel like I failed my brother. I promised him we'd get out alive. Like he promised him. And that situation right there is why to this day I don't make promises.
The thought of an 8-year-old girl having to observe this and then having to relive it to an investigator after the fact is just amazing to me. She, I'm sure, witnessed things that grown people.
There were a number of times in Montana that I'm quite certain that Shasta believed that she was going to be murdered. And one in particular was where Duncan gave her a choice.
One day, he asked me, how do you want to die? You have two choices. I can shoot you or you can be strangled to death. I felt like there was always something guiding me, like a voice in my head telling me what I needed to do and how it needed to go. And so I told them, well, I want you to strangle me, I guess. Because I couldn't picture, it was something telling me like, okay, well, if he strangles you, that gives you time to talk him out of it. Instead of, if he were to shoot you, he could probably just pull the trigger and it would be over. So that's what I chose. Smart. He had me lay down on the ground and he put a rope around my neck. And he squeezed it. Everything started turning white. And I said, please don't jet. So when I had said, please don't jet, he loosened his grip on the rope. And, you know, when you call me that, it just means different. I can tell you really care about me and stuff. And so at that point, I knew that I had gained a lot of trust with him. And I was just pretty much going to do whatever it took to survive at that point.
That was smart. She was smart in
I had to start acting like I liked him or that I wanted to be there with him. Anytime me going home was brought up, I would tell him, no, I don't want to go.
I want to stay here with you. And he'd be like, really?
In their time over there, where Duncan had some sort of epiphany over Shasta and grew some attachment to her.
If I saw that he looked upset or something, I would just be like, you can talk to me. I'm here. I'm your friend. I'm here for you. And so he started kind of letting me in about his life. He told me that he had gotten into a little bit of trouble and that he knew that he was going to go away for a while, back to prison. And he wanted to find kids that were young. He coupled different kids in the beginning, but that they turned out to be too old for him, or that just the area in which they lived, it would have been hard for him to formulate a plan and to put into action what he had wanted to. And he said that he just basically gave up and that he was going to start heading back home. And then he passed by our house and saw me and my brother, and we were outside playing in the pool and playing in the hose, and my mom was mowing the lawn.
He stalked Wolf Lodge for days, making a plan to kidnap Shasta and Dylan.
And no one would hear anything, no one would see anything if he did it in the dark.
And after 7 weeks of horror in the wilderness, Duncan asked Shasta a surprising question.
He basically sat me down and asked if I would be his kid and I would stay with him, that I would call him Dad. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, well, I'm going to take you to meet my family. I want to introduce you to my mom and my siblings, and then we can get our own place and live normally. And okay.
Duncan's mother lived in Washington State, and in order to get there, he would have to
do that if he would at least take me back to Coeur d'Alene, because I told him I wanted to show him where I went to school and where my best friend lived, and I wanted to show him what my life was like, pretty much opening up to him, showing him that I trusted him. And he was like, you really want to show me where you went to school and stuff? And I was like, yeah, I want you to know all about my life, and pretty much. And so that's how we got back onto the road to Coeur d'Alene.
And the next day, Duncan stops in the Denny's at Coeur d'Alene, the very town he abducted her from, and where she was.
And the news came that Shasta had been found, and she was alive. It felt like a miracle. We sent reporters into Idaho. We wanted to try and talk to her. We wanted to know what happened to Dylan. It was all still developing, and it was a huge story for us.
The family were in the woods on 4th of July weekend, and somebody had gotten a call that Shasta had been found, and that was the heartbreak. It's Shasta, it's just Shasta, but I mean, thank God it was Shasta. That was a bummer, man. It's terrible. Everybody was.
I was there, but my brother wasn't, so yeah.
After recovering in the hospital, Shasta leads investigators to the campsites in Lolo Forest.
To hear what this Duncan guy had done to the whole family, it was hard for all of us to handle, the whole family. And it was devastating. We cried. Some of it was very hard to hear. And yeah, being a mother and a grandma, you can't imagine where to begin with, or your grandkids,
The strength in her to have to deal with that with her own brother and your parents and seeing Slade come out there, that's unreal. I mean, he was there, right at the crabapple tree. That is Shasta, that's why she was so tough.
And the FBI and Sheriff's Department revisit Duncan's belongings that were found when he was captured.
Duncan had a Jeep Cherokee that was a rental vehicle.
had taken while they were in captivity, and photographs and various other things, was extracted from the computer.
It's a wealth of evidence for us about his motivation, his makeup, who this person is.
He took pictures of the children in various play gear and being tortured. It's the most horrific, ugly conduct I know of one person engaging in toward children.
We then come to find out that he has a blog, and he's very angry at the system. He's very angry at being a registered sex offender. Sex between a child and an adult isn't necessarily bad. So there's all these little psychological nuggets in there that, in our mind, again, we're not clinicians or therapists, but I certainly believe the designation that he was a sexual sadist.
Based on Shasta's initial interview, Duncan told her he looked for other children before targeting Shasta and Dylan. Detectives believe that there could be other victims, but to find them, they need to try and retrace his movements.
We got another search warrant to do an electronic search of that GPS unit that was in the car. And that North Dakota smart price. And there's a way to essentially bookmark, they call them waypoints. You set this waypoint to record a specific location. And during the course of his journey, he set waypoints in specific areas. So now that raises our curiosity. Okay, what are these waypoints?
There are 33 different markers or waypoints detected on the Jeep's GPS. And when investigators take a closer look at the specific areas marked, they make a chilling connection.
As he made his way from Fargo, North Dakota to Coeur d'Alene, many of these waypoints, that was a residence in an isolated area, that clearly children lived there. There was playground equipment in the yard. He marked that.
And it was pretty clear from early on the plan was to kidnap a child, take them to a remote area, and then sexually assault them. And because he saw this as his revenge on society, because he had been labeled a sex offender, he didn't see any way out. So this was his way to exact revenge on society.
Metro agents believe the horrors that
We're able to really start sitting down with Shasta for longer conversations. She started telling us about other crimes that Duncan committed.
He told me about crimes in other states. He was never caught for it, and that they never found anybody to charge.
Mr. Duncan told Shasta about previous crimes that he had committed. We provided various agencies and the information we had from Shasta about those.
When we contacted them, like any sort of case that you guys are aware of, they immediately got back to us and said, go to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department website in California and look up Anthony Martinez. So we looked up Anthony's case, and there was a description of what had happened.
I'm Marcos Medina, Anthony Martinez's little brother.
I'm Diana Reed, Anthony's mother. We called him Tony. Tony was the oldest. Mark was in kindergarten and Tony was in 4th grade. Everybody.
On April 4th, 1997, in Beaumont, California, Marcos and his 10-year-old brother Tony are playing with friends in their neighbor's backyard.
It was myself, Tony, a friend of mine, and another kid.
And a man wearing a baseball cap approaches them.
He called us over and showed us a picture of a cat sitting on a couch. He said he was looking for his cat, and he would give us each $1 if we would help him search for his cat. Being young kids and thinking $1 is a whole lot of money, we decided we were going to go, hey, we can't find the cat. So he handed us the $1, And the next thing I saw, a knife come out, almost like a switchblade style of a knife. At that point, we realized we were in danger. Tony essentially put himself in the harm's way, aside from the rest of us kids in the alley. And the last thing I ever saw of Tony was him being thrown in the back seat of the vehicle.
It was chaos from then on. You just don't even know what you're doing. You don't know anything. Yes.
My name is Tom Reed, and I was the lead investigator on the Anthony Martinez case. Every law enforcement officer, within probably a couple hours of the kidnap, were out looking for a vehicle with a generic description of a suspect. An older white male with a mustache and the 10-year-old boy who was kidnapped.
15 days later, 60 miles outside of Beaumont, California, a ranger is patrolling Purdue Canyon and notices a high level of...
Unfortunately, that's when he found Anthony buried in a hillside of rocks.
Tony's wrists and ankles had been bound with duct tape, and it was evident he'd been sexually assaulted.
On the duct tape that was located at the scene, there was a thumbprint that was from the suspect. Also, some DNA that could help us locate a suspect. Unfortunately, at the time, we didn't have enough nuclear DNA to identify a suspect in our DNA database. Same with the fingerprint. The fingerprint was not.
Some family friends had taken us out to get some lunch and just kind of preoccupied us during this time, and then they brought us back to the house. I remember walking in and just seeing a lot of friends and family members. Everybody was crying.
We just told him. We just said the only thing you can say. He died.
I just remember instantly crying. I don't think I've ever instantly cried before in my life. It usually is a workout. But it was just being struck.
The task force fruitlessly searches for Anthony's killer for 8 years. And now finally they had a lead.
We reached out to Riverside and said, look, what do you know about this case? What are the circumstances? Their description, and they had a police artist sketch. So, hey, can you fax that to us? And I remember sitting with Mike Janko, the case agent for this, and we were watching come across the fax machine. We saw the sketch, and it looked like Duncan. All matched. Our blood ran cold. This wasn't a one-off. We have something truly evil here. We now have a serial killer.
But investigators conclude
when the agents arrived to get the major case prints to serve them warrant, Duncan said to them, I bet you're here about Martinez. And so now the agents are like, woo, I think we are definitely going in the right direction. Starting those major case prints, Duncan talks a little bit about Anthony, and then also talks about the girls that he murdered in Seattle.
in '96.
Who had refused to talk to police, suddenly confesses that a year before he abducted and murdered Anthony Martinez, he did the same to two little girls in Seattle, Washington. 11-year-old Sammy Jo White and her half-sister, 9-year-old Carmen Cubias.
My name is Sheriff. I was a patrol officer with the King County Sheriff's Office out of Seattle. Sammy Jo and Carmen went missing inside the city of Seattle in July of 1996. They were living in a motel with their mother and their teenage brother. Sammy Jo and Carmen had left the motel. They frequently went out on their own, but when they didn't come back, their mother calls 911 and reports them missing to the Seattle Police Department. It's like they vanished into thin air. They were just gone.
I will never forget Sammy Jo and Carmen's mom talking about getting on the bus. And she just didn't know what had happened to her children.
And then in 1998, 2 years later, in the adjoining jurisdiction of the city of Bothell, there's a transient living in a derelict building, and he found some human bones. And it didn't take long for them to determine that these are our two missing, Sammy Jo and Carmen. Because the remains had been there buried for 2 years, we had no evidence of what happened. We had no suspects, had no persons of interest, so the case quickly grew cold for us until the FBI saying that they think he's talked about these other two killings in the state of Washington. So we turned over all of our case files to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney.
Meanwhile, the major case prints taken from Duncan were shared with Riverside County detectives in California. They compared them to a partial print taken from the duct tape used to find Anthony Martinez. A match was found. Believing they've confirmed all of Duncan's victims, the case moves to the courts.
Pleads guilty to the homicide of Brenda, Mark, and Slade before a judge in Kootenai County.
Sentencing was held in abeyance until the federal trial was complete. And the thought being is that let's go pursue the federal death sentence. And if we are unsuccessful, we at least have the state death penalty.
But when it comes to the federal charges of kidnapping, Duncan abruptly dismisses his lawyers and decides to plead guilty. He says he's going to represent himself. That really took us off on a different direction, rather than at a trial proving guilty.
This is where we really have to bring in a lot of other evidence of why life in prison wouldn't work. He told us he fantasized about prior victims. I don't want this guy spending the rest of his life sitting in a jail cell fantasizing about all his prior victims. That's where he derives his pleasure. We needed to pursue the death penalty here.
I don't think you can ever prepare for the one video of the little boy Dylan being tortured. We wanted to present the video because it clearly showed how heinous the conduct was, and knew that that video was so horrific and so awful that there would be no way that anyone could watch it and not think that he was worthy of the death penalty. It's probably one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence, disturbing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. On August 27th, 2008, the jury sentences Duncan to 3 death sentences, all related to Dylan's murder.
In addition, Duncan receives 5 life terms for his other crimes. One of those life terms is for Anthony Martinez's murder in Riverside.
41 years of being involved in the criminal justice system, I have never met a more evil person than Joseph Duncan.
We got unbelievably dangerous monster off the street. We provided answers to a couple of families, but nobody takes any joy in what happened.
A lot of people devastated still after that. But I think that Shasta is a hero. I mean, yeah, who knows how many lives.
She had this intuition to be able to talk to him and gain his confidence until she got to a situation where she could get help. What she went through was horrible, and our heart has to go out to her and everything that happened.
For Shasta, it's a bitter pill of what ifs. What if Duncan hadn't seen she and Dylan playing outside? What if the judge in Minnesota hadn't granted Duncan bail just 2 months before his rampage?
That's a blessing and a curse because it shouldn't have ever gotten that far. He should, in my case, brought awareness to the type of person he was and got him locked up. And he could never do that to someone else.
Being here after all